Hey there, Internet! This is Lee from the Brooklyn Kitchen in my Brooklyn Kitchen, and I'm going to show you guys how to make stock today. So we'll be covering some basic knife skills and a really basic recipe that you can use for pretty much everything. So I have my mise en place here. I have onions, I have celery, and I have parsnips because I don't have any carrots. So I go to the farmer's market every weekend and I usually buy the odds and ends bag because it's really cheap. And it always has these little cuts of parsnips where the part that was bad has obviously been thrown away. Parsnips have a really similar flavor to carrots, so I'm going to use them in my stock today. A stock is going to be 50% onion, 25% parsnip or carrot if you have it, and 25% celery. I also have a chef's knife, a cutting board that's big enough that I can use my knife on it, and I'm also going to hold my knife with a pinch grip. So I have my first finger on this side and I have my thumb here and I'm pinching the blade. So that way I'm using the handle for the strength, but I'm really guiding my blade with the blade itself, which is going to make it safer because this isn't particularly sharp. So since I'm holding it by the blade, I'm less likely to hurt myself because I have more control. So since I'm making stock, I don't really care what my vegetables look like, but I am going to give them a little bit of a chop, and I'm leaving the skin on this parsnip. If I were making a soup or something, I would probably peel it, but again, this is a stock, so this is all just going to get cut and thrown away. So I don't care that much. So what I just did is cut all of these into planks so they're all roughly the same thickness, and I'm gonna cut down these big guys and I'm just gonna give it a really rough chop because it really doesn't matter. Like I said, it's becoming stock, so I'm just doing a rough chop like this. If you were doing a soup, obviously you would want to go for something less rustic than that, but for our purposes, that's totally fine. Next, I'm going to show you how to do the onion. So, this is the top of the onion. This is the tail of the onion. There is a trick to not cry while you're doing onions. So, I'm going to cut the top off. Again, this is the top, and this is the bottom. So I'm cutting the top off, again using that pinch grip on my knife. And now that I have a flat surface, I can turn my onion over. It's not going to go anywhere on me because I have that flat cutting surface. I'm going to cut it in half at the root. This is called a bridge hold. See, I'm making a little bridge with my fingers. So now that I have my onion half, I'm just going to peel this skin off. You can leave the skin on if you're making stock and you want to add some color to it. I don't think that's what I want for this stock. I'm using parsnips, which are white instead of orange like carrots, and I have my nice white onions, so I'm just going to do a white stock. So now what I'm going to do, alright, my onion has instructions on it. You can see all of these lines that nature has put into these onions for me. So I'm just going to do my best to follow these lines. And I'm not going all the way through my onion, but I'm going very close to the root. And since I left that root intact, it's holding my onion together for me. So I'm making all of these little cuts, and again I'm switching over to the bridge hold so I don't hurt myself. And I'm using the pinch grip so my blade has a little more control because this knife is not sharp. So I've made all of my cuts across. And now I'm going to do my cuts this way, and I end up with this beautiful dice that I really didn't have to work hard for at all. It just naturally happens as I glide my knife through this onion that I've scored already. So this is a dice. This is what they teach you in culinary school. This is what your chef will spend hours making you do when you start working in restaurants. It's a pretty easy cut. And we don't really need to go that small for what we're doing, but it's always good to practice. You have all the time in the world right now, you might as well practice. So now we're going to move on to our celery. And I bought this at the supermarket the other day when I was still going outside. So this celery is not super dirty, it's a little bit dirty at the bottom, so I'm going to give it a quick rinse. Just to get all that dirt off. And if I were serving celery raw, I would cut off the roots and the tops because they're not pretty, but I'm going to throw them into my stock anyway because it's stock. It doesn't matter. It's all going to get strained out. And then to cut my celery, I'm going to take my celery rib and I'm just going to cut it down to a size that's comparable to the onion. But again, the size on this really doesn't matter because we're just going to boil it all down. Oh, the way that I'm holding my fingers, it's called bear cloth sometimes. So the idea is, I have my knife is very sharp, but I'm holding it against my knuckle, see? So I'm using my knuckle as a guide. So my blade is constantly on my knuckle, but I'm never gonna cut myself because I'm using it as a guide. So let me show you that again, but I'll explain what I'm doing with my guiding hand. So I have my little celery stalks. So I'm using my fingers as a guide to not hurt myself. So my fingers are curved. My tips aren't out here to die. I'm just using my knuckles on my non-dominant hand as a guide for the blade that I am holding with my non-dominant hand. And I'm getting this beautiful celery dice, which this would be great for making chicken salad or tuna salad or something. Anything where you would want a nice dice, this is the cut that you're gonna use. So I'm just gonna go ahead and rough chop the rest of these veggies and then I'll show you what to do. Okay, YouTube, we're ready to make this stock. So I have my Rubbermaid container here where I had my parsnips before, and this is half parsnip, half celery, and then over on my cutting board I have a 5-pound bag of onions that I cut up real quick, and that way I'm sure that I have my 50% onions and then 25% celery, 25% carrot or parsnip for my mirepoix, which is the basis of stock. This is the French style. Other classical techniques have different ratios, but this is the one that I'm familiar with because it's what I was trained in, so that's what I'm showing you today. So I have my big stock pot here. I just washed it out, which is why it's wet. So I have that over high flame, trying to warm it up enough to evaporate all of the water so I can put in some oil. So normally for stock, you could just put in, you can just throw all of your veggies into a pot and cover it with water and bring it to a boil. But since I have everything cut up and I'm making an intentional stock, not a scrap stock, nothing wrong with a scrap stock. Scrap stocks are great, I use them all the time. But since we have this extra little bit of time and these extra ingredients, I'm gonna go through that extra step of getting everything a little bit caramelized, getting a little color on it, getting it softened before I put the water on, and that's gonna increase the depth of flavor in my stock. Alright, so my stock pot is hot, so I'm going to add in a little bit of oil. This is just canola oil in here. You just want a nice neutral oil. There's no need to use your extra virgin olive oil for this. You can if you want to, but it's not adding anything, so why bother? You're just wasting money. So into my stock pot first, I'm going to throw all of those onions that I sliced up. Doesn't that make a nice sound? I hope you guys can hear that out in the internet world. So I'm just stirring this. I really hope you can hear that sizzling because it sounds incredible. And And I'm gonna do something that I wouldn't do for a normal stock, but since I know what I want to use this for, I can. So normally when you make a stock, wait till the train goes by. The B and Q trains run outside of my apartment every 10 minutes. So normally when you're making a stock, you don't add salt, but I know what I want to do with this. I want this to be a broth for a barley risotto I'm going to make later. So I'm going to go ahead and season it a little bit, and that way I'll know not to season the water that I'm cooking my barley in, because I'm just going to be cooking it in this seasoned stock. So you wouldn't want to do this in a regular stock, because a lot of the times when you're making stock, you're just making it out of scraps, like these scraps that I set aside earlier. Although I'm actually using most of my scraps for this, because like I said, it's stock. It doesn't matter what the veg looks like as long as it's in there to get that flavor. So my onions have been in here for about a minute. They're starting to look a little bit translucent, the tiniest little bit. So I'm gonna add in my celery and parsnip now. And I'm just going to give this a good stir to get everything combined. I'll season again, because every time you add an ingredient to something, you want to season. It'll build those layers of flavor, which is really what you want. Just making sure that everything is evenly coated, everything has a little bit of salt on it. And now I'm going to fill this container with water, and I will top off my stock and just let it go. So I'm gonna let this simmer for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and then I'll come back and strain out all of the veg and make something beautiful with our stock. So like I said, I'm gonna make a barley risotto with my stock, but I'm also cooking some white beans to go with that, so I get my protein along with my complex carbs. So these are cannellini beans that I soaked overnight in just water, and I have since drained the water from them, the soaking water, and I'm adding them to a pot with new water. There's no salt in this. So when you're cooking beans, they have a tough outer skin, and if you add salt to that, that will never soften. A trick if you need to, if you have trouble digesting beans, is you can add a pinch of baking soda to the cooking water. So at this step you would add baking soda, and just a pinch. The baking soda will break down those tough skins, and it'll help with your digestion if you're someone who has difficulty digesting legumes. They're a big part of my diet, so I don't have a problem digesting them because I eat them every day, so my GI system is used to it. But if you're someone who's not a big bean eater, it's not a bad idea to add a pinch of baking soda at this point. And I also wanted to show you guys, I saved the base of my celery, and I'm just gonna put this in some water and I'm gonna let it regrow. So if you let this go for a couple of days, it'll start to sprout new celery stalks and celery leaves. And the celery leaves are delicious. They're great in salads. They're great as like a garnish on stuff. They're delicious. They just taste like celery, but in leaf form instead of in stalk form, so it's not as fibrous. And in the coming weeks, it's a really good idea to figure out how to supplement your fresh vegetables. So anything that you can regrow, you should. I also keep scallions in my window in a little glass of water, the white ends, because if you save the root, you can regrow that 3 or 4 times and it'll still be good, and that way you have access to a fresh herb.